Hi everyone, my name is Michael Sweeney. I'm here on behalf of Premium Screenplay, interviewing Jonathan Hersh, a literary manager at Housefire Management. John, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. Nice to meet you.
Nice
Appreciate
to
it.
meet you as well. First question that I wanted to kind of ask right off the bat, to kind of bring together the whole management of screenwriters. In all screenplays have a moral to them, or all stories usually have a moral to them. What would you say that the moral of your own personal story and your own personal journey through this industry would be?
Good question. Yeah, so kind of like the guiding light that we're all walking towards. I think it would be following your creative instincts or your instincts in general and letting that be your compass in a way.
Good. All right. Awesome. Awesome. I promise the rest of the questions are a little more standard. I just wanted to start off really off with a bang. So I'm interested. I know that you went to USC, and I know that you went to USC. I assume for the through the cinematic arts track. What originally ignited your passion for storytelling, and what did you originally go to school for?
So when I was 13, I got a mini DV camera, and I grew up in Vermont and lived in a house with a cemetery in the backyard. So I started off trying to make little short films, short horror movies in the cemetery, which was a great natural setting. So that was kind of the spark that ignited my journey and passion, and then obviously watched everything under the sun that I could get my hands on, and wound up wanting to go to film school and having a passion for it after making a few short films, and initially wanting to do production or write. I didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do. I just knew that I wanted to be involved to some extent.
Right, right. That makes sense. That makes sense. So then, post school as well, like right after graduation. I looked at you. You've worked at Lionsgate. You've worked at CAA. Just explain that journey a little bit and how did you come by each opportunity? What did you learn from each one, and how did you gain the I guess the experiences and the skills as well as the connections to sort of move your way up in the industry?
Yeah, so I did a few internships while I was in school, and then afterwards I was applying to jobs, and it was, it was a tricky time. It was 2009, so right in the middle of a recession, and the only job that I could find was production accounting for Showtime. So I worked on 2 seasons of Californication and 1 season of United States of Terra. The job was an accounting clerk, so essentially you're handing out pay stubs, filing purchase orders, and stuff like that. But looking back on it, it was a great experience just because you literally see every line item that goes into making a season of television. So it was a cool experience.
Kind of in the spirit of improvisation, being in the industry myself, I know that there's a lot of improvisation you sort of have to do. Like you said, like you took a job in, you said production, it was accounting.
Yeah,
I can only speak for myself. I assume that most creatives wouldn't. The word accounting is not going to be very very enticing to them, but you sort of do what you have to do in order to reach a level of connection that will open up different possibilities. Beyond that initial job, as you were sort of finding your way through the industry, can you talk about different additional sort of like frustrations that you dealt with, like maybe an example of like roadblocks that you had to sort of circumvent, or sort of ways that you had to kind of improvise?
Yeah, I mean, initially coming out of film school, you expect that you're going to be just hired and given an opportunity, but that's obviously not the case. Like, this town is very competitive, and there are only select positions available if you are, starting at an agency or wanting to work at a production company, or, kind of getting your first foot in the door. Internships are a little bit easier just because they're unpaid, obviously, but you can't make a
Yeah.
living that way or survive. And you usually have to do those while you're in school. So So yeah, it's a constant grind even today as a manager, like in a different way, but it's a very, I guess, enticing business that attracts a lot of people on the executive side, on the screenwriting side, on the director side, on the actor side, definitely. So yeah, it's just a constant kind of grind and looking for those opportunities.
Right, right. And in the spirit of kind of now bringing more what you actually currently do, I just wanted to have you, just for people out there who might not be aware, how would you define the role of a literary manager in Hollywood? And what do you think what do you think people, like newbies, biggest misconceptions of the role are?
Sure. So a literary manager is essentially a manager who represents writer and directors or writer directors in film and television or digital media. And if you're writing novels, then you have a literary agent, which is a little bit different. Yeah, essentially what a manager does is constantly reading and identifying talent and then nurturing that talent and developing material, very hands-on in terms of developing scripts. So if you have a finished script, either giving some notes and getting it to a place where it's market ready, or if you're developing something new, finding the time to kind of consider all the ideas you're excited about, figure out which one has the best chance of cutting through in the marketplace, and then developing that from scratch. And then essentially the job is to either sell that material or, more often than not, introduce the client to as many people in the sphere as they can that would be helpful to kind of propelling their career, as well as agents. So agents, usually in my experience, you start with a manager and then you kind of graduate to an agent.
Right.
But not always the case.
Right. Because with agent, at least as I've come to understand, agents are a lot, and correct me if I'm wrong, agents are a lot less involved in the creative side of things and more on the marketability side of things? Or is there, like, how did the two jobs blend between, like, the line between agent and manager as far as balancing
Sure.
that creativity with marketability?
Very simply, agents are licensed by the state and managers are not. So agents are able to negotiate deals, managers are not. Typically, I mean, there are only a handful of agencies, and there are a lot of boutique management companies, a lot of independent managers like myself, probably a few dozen management companies, if not hundreds. And essentially, managers are a lot more involved in the creative, have fewer clients. This is a generalization, but most managers have fewer clients, are
Right.
much more involved in the creative, are able to give notes and stuff like that and develop material. And then agents are much more transactional, have a larger client roster, but also have a lot of times more resources in terms of information, because if you're at a big agency, you have one agent who's covering Netflix, one agent who's covering Hulu, and you have staffing grids and all this kind of stuff. So you have a bit larger of an infrastructure at an agency, although some management companies essentially function like an agency nowadays. So the line
Right.
is a little blurry.
Right. That's fair. And actually, you mentioned something that I wanted to touch upon as far as your work at Housefire Management. Housefire Management is your individual management company,
Yeah, it's
correct?
just me. Yeah.
Oh, awesome. So how did you, and correct me if I'm wrong, was your previous position at a larger management company and then you moved
No,
over
so
there, or where did you?
my track was kind of like this a little bit. I started off in accounting. I wound up at CAA where I was a reader, so doing a ton of script coverage.
Right.
And I did that for 4 years, and I covered over 1,000 pieces of material while I was there, scripts, books, manuscripts, all kinds of stuff. Then, while I was doing that, I was also a writer, so I was writing feature screenplays.
Okay.
After that, I went to a company called Broad Green Pictures that was like an upstart independent film financier mini studio, and I was a development exec there for 3 years. Um, so worked on the development side of things. We had a whole slate of feature projects that I was involved with, and then that company shut down end of 2017, and I was kind of taking meetings, interviewing for the development track, which is highly competitive, and there are very few jobs available and a lot of candidates up for any given position. So I was meeting around and just talking to people, and somebody said, "Oh, you should just be a manager." And I kind of took them literally and jumped into it, and that was about 6.5 years ago. So that was kind of the beginning. Started signing clients that I was excited about, and yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
It sounds like taking that advice definitely worked out for you. And actually, it kind of paves the way into my next series of questions, specifically about like connections and collaboration. Because, like, as is true in any business, it's everyone is always echoing the phrase, "It's all about who you know. It's all about who you know. It's all about your contacts and your connections." And I was just wondering, is there any experience that you could share where maybe a connection that you didn't expect got you an opportunity that you didn't expect?
I mean, every day it's something like that. If not for me, for my clients. Yeah, I'm trying to think of a good example. I mean, one example for a client was, we were setting her up on general meetings for like a year or a little bit more, and she went on a lot of different meetings and connected with one place super well, and had a good connection with them. But like almost a year had gone by, and her whole goal was to staff on a show, and it just wasn't happening. Um, and then, like, out of the blue, got a call from that production company. They had a show staffing at Netflix, had a meeting with the showrunner like the next day, and then by Monday she was staffed on a show. So it can really happen that fast, and you never
Yeah.
really know where it's going to come from. But yeah, I mean, I've had other experiences like that where I meet with somebody at one company, and all of a sudden, yeah, one specifically met with an exec and sent him a script that wasn't quite the right fit for them at that time, but then he
Mhm.
moved over to Lionsgate and called me up and bought the script for my client. So you never really know where it's going to come from, but I think just keeping an open door and meeting as many
Yeah.
people as you can and forming the right connections, you put yourself in a better position numbers
Right.
wise to forge those opportunities.
Right, because as you move up, they move up and branch out to different places, and that kind of like
Right.
expands your pool
Exactly.
of
Yeah.
people.
So it's like, I when I first started as a manager, most of my connections were with other managers. So it doesn't
Hmm.
really help my business necessarily unless I want to, get drinks and bitch about the industry. But basically, I started an Excel spreadsheet or a Google Doc, and every time I connected with somebody, I would put their name and kind of build it out from there. And now, that was 6.5 years ago. Now I'm at I add to it every day. I added a couple names this morning. So now I'm at 1,531.
Oof. Oh, boy.
And I try to
No.
update it, because people leave the industry or they change companies.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, and a lot of those people I don't talk to regularly, but and some of them I haven't talked to in years, but every time there is a new connection, I try to keep track of it, and then hopefully my clients do as well. Every time I set them up on a meeting, they have kind of their network, so it all kind of feeds itself.
Right, yeah. And you brought up another an interesting point actually that I've also felt true in my own connections is that it's if all of your connections are a bunch of managers and you're a manager, it's not always it's useful to a point, but then branching out and meeting different kinds of people in different
Right.
kinds of fields
Yeah.
is going to connect you to different people, and then connect you to people that they know, and sort of
Definitely. And not to say like I really enjoy the company of managers. They're fun to hang out with and talk with, and actually a lot of managers do collaborate because my roster is more writer heavy than director. Another
Oh, okay.
manager roster may be more director heavy, and I've definitely had a lot of good conversations with other managers. Hey, maybe your director would be a good fit for this. Agents, not as much, just because the agencies are so competitive, they don't talk to each
Right.
other as much, but managers are a little bit more collaborative.
Right. Well, even speaking of agents, if you have a client who has an agent and has you as a manager, how does that collaboration work? Like, is it, I don't want to say easier or more difficult, but how different is it when you're working with a fellow manager than when you're working with your client's agent?
Yeah, so I mean, I think two heads are better than one. So I always like it if a client has an agent. It makes my job sometimes easier, sometimes not. If you have the right agent, I should say. But you are able to be a little bit more collaborative in terms of strategy. Like if I've been developing something with the client for 6 months and it's ready to go, and we give it to the agent, and the agent, I have my kind of circle of folks that I would take the script to, but maybe the agent just heard at a staff meeting that so and so is looking for exactly this. Then it just kind of, two heads are sometimes better than one with that kind of thing. So hopefully, and when it's working well, it's a very collaborative, productive process that just kind of puts a little bit more gasoline on the fire.
All right, awesome, awesome. So, moving on to questions, I'm sure that people watching are definitely going to want to know, as likely most of them being writers. How do um how do your clients how do I phrase it? How do your clients come about? Like, what avenues have people? Because a lot of writers are told, send query letters, make connections, put yourself out there as much as you can, but there's always that sort of sense of you're throwing your resumes to the wind and kind of hoping for the best. So how have you taken on clients, and what route have they taken to find you, or for you to find them?
Yeah, so pretty much everybody always asks me that, and
I
producers as
imagine.
well. Well, I mean, it's a valid question, and I think it's different for every manager. For me, it's a little bit of everything. Like there are referrals from industry execs is a big one. If a producer has a friend of a friend or just met with somebody that doesn't have a manager, agent referrals, to be honest, not as much, because typically if an agent is trying to find their client a manager, it means there's something wrong with the client that they're trying to put a manager in to
Good
fix.
point.
Um, so contests, I mean, I think also every manager goes through kind of like cycles of when they're a little bit more hungry to sign than others. So if I've just signed one or two people, I might not be as hungrily like reading
Right.
outside voices as other times. So you kind of gotta gauge the cycles. But contests, contest winners, um, Blacklist website, Coverfly, Roadmap Writers,
Hmm.
Stage 32, all those kinds of things as well. Recommendations from people I know. Um, I would say at the bottom of that list is query letters, although I actually signed somebody off of a query like a few months ago, and I'm reading a script from a query now. So I think it depends.
Right.
If you have that, if the stars align and you have that exact thing that somebody's looking for, it can work. But I do get a lot of query letters.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's understandable that so much of it is about timing as well, like
Yeah.
depending on who you, at which, no one can know for certain, which again, like brings me back to the importance of having connections and having people who can kind of give that kind of an insight to people,
Yeah.
as far as who they know. But continuing to speak on clients, obviously being a good writer is important as far as like enticing you to sign somebody. But I was wondering what when a writer walks into your office or like gets on a Zoom call, what qualities do they look for? And do you have any examples of perhaps like a writer who really pulled you in instantly, or perhaps somebody who like lost you? Like how like
Mm.
how does that work? Like, do you have any experiences that you can kind of
Yeah, I mean, I
go
think
to?
if I've read the script and I'm meeting with the writer, the next step is just to find, I mean, I guess there's two things. One is, the good in the room term that we've all heard. It is a piece of it. It definitely factors in. Because a lot of the business is me being able to trust that the client that I'm sending to go meet with a connection of mine that I've forged over the last several years is going to have a good meeting and not say something offensive or off or something like that. And it's always nice to get those calls after the meeting, like, oh, I just love this person, I'm going to hang out with them and just be friends. Like, sometimes I'll set a client up on a meeting and they'll like, be at a premiere, or a birthday party, or just hanging out as friends, and it's like a genuine connection. So I think part of it is making sure that they're going to be able to forge those connections. Another piece of it is pitching,
Mhm.
which is a big piece, and making sure that a lot of people, it's very unnatural for a writer to go in and pitch their story to a room full of executives who have heard 10 pitches this week and couldn't care less.
Right. Yeah.
But it is a skill that you need to develop if you want to have a career.
Right.
And then the other piece of it, I think, is just is it a good personal connection for me? And is this somebody that I'm gonna, be excited to get on the phone with every week, and talk through notes for an hour, hour and a half, and vice versa. Am I the right person for them to go on this
Right.
journey with? So, yeah, a lot of it is kind of feeling out the person as well as the material.
Okay, I get that. Would it be, and you could totally call BS on me if this is totally inaccurate, but would you say if I were to compare it to perhaps getting the ability to get the script in front of you is the audition, and then meeting in person would be the callback for the ultimate goal of signing? Is that
Yeah, I guess so. I don't the casting process is, or the talent side of the business is pretty alien to me. So I don't
right?
even
Right.
really know what goes into a callback, or an audition. But
That's
yeah,
fair.
I
That's
think
fair.
that's kind of similar. Yeah.
Okay. All right. And actually, going back to something else that you had said earlier, as far as your like earlier influence, what kind of like what makes a good story in your mind? Like, I know that I remember you saying that you kind of shooting your own like little horror short films kind of was initially what got you into. I don't know if you're still specializing partially in that or if it's all genres, but what makes a good story to you?
Just in general, like if I'm reading something, what makes it? Like,
It could be general or specific, anything that you consider when reading a script, like
yeah.
how quickly it grabs you, like how long
Yeah.
into a script until it sort of loses you, perhaps maybe
I
would be a
think
better
the
way to phrase it.
first thing, just because normally if I'm reading something I don't know the person yet,
Right.
sometimes that's not the case, but normally it's coming from somebody I don't know. Usually, number one is the log line, the concept. Does it feel, because I look at hundreds of log lines a week, and my clients' log lines as well as others, as well as stuff that's in production or about to be released. So like, is this something that feels unique enough to cut through all the hundreds of thousands of scripts in the market? Maybe not hundreds of thousands, but all the thousands of scripts.
But a lot of them. Yeah.
So the log line is number one, and then number two is kind of like, yeah, like you said, just like the first few pages, am I being sucked in right away, or is it kind of familiar and we've seen it before? I can tell pretty quickly now, just because I've read a lot over the last decade, if it has promise in the first few pages, and typically, like, if it's, I now separate my client reading from like potential new client reading. So obviously the client reading takes priority, but I try to read new people as well. And I think every manager always has like one eye open towards new talent. But if I'm going through a list like I was doing yesterday of all the potential new client material, I'm probably only dedicating like 5-10 pages to, sometimes more if it really grabs you and you want to see where it goes. But typically, like, there's just so much, it really comes down to the first 10 pages, I would say, or less.
Right.
And so making, like, once you have a killer log line that's going to just really cut through the noise, making sure that, I mean, the whole script has to be good, but especially
Of course,
the first
yeah. But those
pages,
pages have really gotta, they have to reel you in and interest you. Yeah. In terms of a story being marketable, I wonder, because you mentioned before, and this is I was told this when I went to school for screenwriting, the idea of have 3 scripts to present, because number one, more than likely they're going to pick your least favorite, but also they're going to pick the one that's most marketable if you're lucky to get it in front of representation. But I wonder, has there ever been a time where a story or a script has been so solid and so good, perhaps from like an existing client, and you have them change it and adjust it to make it more marketable?
Yeah, all the time. Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
I mean, I think
I want to make sure I give your clients the confidentiality, but is there an example that you are at liberty to mention, or even just vaguely?
Yeah, I mean, there's a script that, I mean, I also think there's another category of, like, I do look for high concept material that can kind of cut through and is a great, like, studio fare, that all the studios have all these pod deals and they're constantly looking for material, so they want to feed the studio machine, which is always looking for high concept material. So I think that's a great path. The other path is like something that's so outside of that realm, that's so different and bold and will never sell because it's too crazy, but it's something that people want to read, and it gets the job on the next thing. So yeah, I mean, there was a script that I would say fits a bit more in that category, that we were trying to make a little bit more marketable for buyers and kind of injecting a little bit more genre elements into it because it was kind of a drama, so making it fit a little bit more of a genre category. So yeah, those kinds of things happen all the time. But yeah. I think the danger is kind of like pushing something into a direction that it's not. So you want to be mindful of like, what is the movie, and if it fits into that box, great. If not, maybe it's something else.
Right,
yeah.
Right. Your background in filmmaking also, I'm sure, helps give clients a little bit of comfort that you're not just trying to explain away or trim away the essence of the story, that you're working collaboratively to get the best version of the story that's actually going to see the light of day. I think there's that
Right.
difference as well of like writing
Yeah.
the perfect story, but don't you want it to be seen by people? Don't you want people to actually enjoy what you've created?
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. In terms of like looking toward the future of entertainment, especially sort of the post double strikes that we experienced last year, does that kind of change the sort of advice that you would give writers? Like, is there anything that's unique to if someone is graduating, for example, maybe this year, where we're still about a year removed from the strikes, but things are maybe going a little bit slower.
I mean, post strike, it really doesn't affect people that are just starting out who aren't. I mean, everything affects everything, but if you're not in the guild, I mean, and we're in a post strike era, I guess the only thing would to be maybe a little bit mindful of would be just like it is more competitive now than ever because at least at this very moment, like studios have kind of tightened their purse strings, aren't spending as much. There are fewer staffing opportunities. So I guess just being mindful of that there are fewer opportunities, but not letting that discourage you if that's really what you want to do, and just more than ever making sure that your material, what you're writing, is the one thing that you can control, and making sure that that is positioned correctly to cut through.
Right, right. And in terms of the kind of work you look for your clients, like i.e. selling features, and I would assume, like you mentioned, getting staffed on um, notable TV shows. Are there any? I don't know. I guess sort of new media ways of storytelling that you sort of see if you can get your clients work. And like I know that there are a lot of there are things that are webisodes and writers who write for like audio mediums like podcasts, things like that.
Yeah.
Does that extend to what you kind of outsource and try to and connect your
Sometimes,
clients with?
yeah, I have a client working on a scripted podcast at the moment. But for the most part, I would say that bubble has kind of burst a little bit. Like, there's definitely a hunger for that, but it's not like it was a couple of years ago. I think, yeah, and in terms of new media like webisodes and stuff like that, I think it can be really good in terms of like creating a proof of concept and not having to go through the system as much. And like if it's something that you really want to do, just go make it. Like Broad City was a web series, and now it's
Oh, I didn't realize that.
a launch pad for their careers, as well as a great show. So yeah, I think if you're doing it with that in mind, yes, can be great. In terms of the money that comes with it, it's generally not as much.
Right. Which
Yeah.
that makes sense. I would expect that. And oh, I feel like I have to ask this because it's been such like a hot button topic, especially with the previous strikes. What are your thoughts of have you seen any ways in which AI, for example, has impacted the industry, or has it really like found its way to you in a really like meaningful sense?
Right. Not yet, although, well, it's funny. I actually just got a client just got a studio offer, and the last line of the offer said no use of generative AI. So I guess that's something that we're all talking about right now, and that is a negotiating point. But not yet, except for there are a couple services now that do script coverage and notes, and
Yes.
it's really crazy. Just
Yes, as a reader in my day job,
yeah,
that topic has sort of come about as well, which is why I also thought it was worth mentioning because Well, I mean, in my humble opinion, I don't. I would hope that AI would never be able to truly replace writers. I wonder. I would hope that you feel the same, or at least that there's enough fight against it where you can't
Yeah.
really replicate that
I mean,
human.
I think the gains that the WGA got are really good, and I think will prevent um, that kind of thing in the near future. I do think it's getting better and expanding at a crazy rate, and just yeah, seeing what it was able to do, breaking down a script, and it even gave like director and cast suggestions. One of them, um, they weren't super helpful because it was like David Fincher or somebody
Right,
like
right.
super A level. So I do think that hopefully it will be a tool that we can all use that doesn't replace us for good.
Right,
We'll
right.
see.
That's fair. Yeah. All right. Um, and kind of in the same essence of like how things have changed, you said that you've been a manager how long? 6 years, I think you said.
6.5, yeah.
6.5 years. Have you seen any, like, even if it's like the smallest idiosyncrasies, like have you seen changes to how you do your job in that time, like the way you did things 6 years ago to how you do things now, or has it just been experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think I there have been a lot of different like monumental shifts since I started. Like I started kind of top of 2018, and then there was the WGA ATA skirmish, and then there was the pandemic, and then there was the writer strike, and then there was the actor strike. So there's always something going on, and there's all these headlines of like Hollywood is dead and all that kind of stuff. Like I tend to try to tune all that stuff out and not listen to it because everybody's experience is different, and even if
Yeah.
there are fewer opportunities right now, that could change 6 months from now. It might be different for one person compared to another. And I think as a manager, the goal is to have a broad variety of clients on your roster so that it's almost like a stock portfolio. If some category isn't performing super well at one moment, then another is, and it kind of fluctuates. But and I think writers are similar because you have a lot of projects in your portfolio as well. So that's kind of like your way to hedge bets and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there's always something going on. I try to keep my head down and just keep trusting my gut in terms of like what's great and what's going to cut through, and hopefully it does. And if not, move on to the next thing.
Right. And actually, you mentioned something that I could have asked earlier, but it only came to me now. The idea of the portfolios that your clients have. How much are you of the belief that clients should have somewhat similar projects in tone or different projects? Like the variety of, like, I have three scripts of three different genres, but they're
Yeah.
very quintessentially me, or there's three scripts and they're all about ghosts, like how do you kind of balance that out?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, I used to be of the mind that you want to kind of have some sort of a brand. I don't know that that's true anymore. I mean, I've had clients that are successful in like, I mean, look at Jordan Peele. Like he started off doing comedy
Yeah.
sketch work and then shifted pretty drastically to horror, and it worked out. So I would say, and I've had clients that have done like one was on a kids show and an animated show, but also had this like really dark horror thing that he wanted to do. So um, yeah, I think it really depends on the person and what you want. And then other clients that literally stick to the same genre and don't want to do anything else, and that's fine. um, I think if you're in TV and you want to be a 1 hour writer, then you should have maybe a couple different um, couple different genres just to hedge your bets in terms of staffing. Or if you want to staff on both, then you should have a half-hour sample and an hour-long sample, because a lot of times staffing opportunities, like, they want one or the other.
Right. Right.
But other than that, I think you can kind of just do what feels right for you.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds good. That sounds like a nice happy medium. But and again, it all comes back to the right fit between writer and writer and manager.
Yeah.
So I guess I feel like we've already touched over so much of this, but to kind of like to close it out, what makes being a manager so meaningful to you? Like, what instances like do you go home feeling like the most like profound sense of satisfaction from a job? Like the best day coming to a close. Like, what would that what does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, we all kind of want the same thing. We want to see really cool stories on the screen, whether it's the small screen or the big screen. So whatever I can do to kind of advance somebody to closer to that goal, and also getting people paid so they aren't living in paycheck to paycheck is a nice feeling.
Yeah.
So yeah, somebody said Hollywood is, what was the quote? It was like there's two fault lines running through Hollywood. One is the San Andreas, and the other is the line between art and commerce. So I think whenever those two things kind of like converge, is a happy day in our business.
I think that's a great way to end. I can't think of anything better to end on. I really appreciate this. Thank you so much for hopping on. I hope viewers definitely got a lot of insight into the industry, and hopefully to things that will encourage them to continue on. So I appreciate your time, and yeah, fantastic.
Keep on keeping on. Awesome. Thank you.